This episode of Shaun of the South is brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition of my family dating back to my granddaddy, the fisherman, the woodcarver, and the Southern Baptist, who always said the best cure for idle hands is to build something, so keep your hands sharp with a Case knife.
Well. You are listening to the 75th episode of Shaun of the South, and I'm your host tonight, Sean Dietrich, and man, we got a great show lined up ahead of here, coming to you live with the podcast airwaves and the radio waves all over this fine nation. These fellas fixing to help bring in this 75th anniversary episode are Clark, Zupardi, and Hartley, everybody. Clark, Zupardi, and Hartley.
It would have been better for us both had we never in this wide, wicked world ever met. But the pleasure we both seem to gather, oh my darling, I'll never regret. I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, who is sailing far over the sea. I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, and I wonder if she ever thinks of me. Well, you told me once, dear, that you loved me, and you vowed that we never should part. But a link in the chain has been broken, leaving me with a sad and aching heart. I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, who is sailing far over the sea. I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, and I wonder if she ever thinks of me. When the cold, cold grave has enclosed me, will you stand by and shed just one tear? Will you say to the strangers around you, poor heart, you have broken lives here? I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, who is sailing far over the sea. I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, and I wonder if she ever thinks of me. Yeah, I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, who is sailing far over the sea. Yeah, I'm thinking tonight of my blue eyes, and I wonder if she ever thinks of me.
This portion of our program is brought to you by Visit North Alabama. The Mountain Lakes Tourist Association traveled to visit the 16 North Alabama counties that make this state what it is. Festivals, attractions, and restaurants all over Alabama. Blount County, Cherokee County, Colbert County, Coleman County, DeKalb County, Etowah County, Franklin County, Jackson County, Lauderdale County, Lawrence County, Limestone County, Madison County, Marion County, Marshall County, Morgan County, Winston County. Or visit the Horton Mill Bridge just off Alabama 75, about 5 miles north. Laniana, built in 1935, all the work was done strictly by hand tools. Think about that for a second. Or how about the North Alabama Barbecue Trail, trek across North Alabama on a holy, sacred pilgrimage of saturated fat and slow smoked pork. Other states do their barbecue differently than they do in Alabama, and that's not to say that they don't do it right. But but that is absolutely to say that they do it dead wrong. Visit North Alabama today, because whatever you want to do, you can do it better in North Alabama. Look them up at Visit North Alabama or northalabama.org or hashtag Visit North AL. And now we're going to have another tune here from Clark's Party in Hartley, everybody. Clark's Party in Hartley.
I won't sit here crying over you. From now on, when you step out, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll lock the door, put out the cat, and I'll go step into. Yeah, I'll go step into my honey, I'll go step into. I'll lock the door, put out the cat, and I'll go step into. Come home late, we begin to fight. You tell me that I'm off fish in the sea, but bait ain't what it used to be, and I got news for you. After this, when you step out, well, I'll go step into. Yeah, I'll go step into my honey, I'll go step into. I'll lock the door, put out the cat, and I'll go step into. Come home and tell me where you've been. Your hair messed up, your clothes don't fit you right. Don't be surprised if you should find your lipstick on me too. Then you'll know that I have been stepping just like you. And I'll go step into my honey, I'll go step into. I'll lock the door, put out the cat, and I'll go step into. Step into my honey, I'll go step into. I'll lock the door, put out the cat, and I'll go step into. Yeah, I'll go step into my honey, I'll go step into. I'll lock the door, put out the cat, and I'll go step into.
Well, for our 75th anniversary episode, 75 episodes, I can hardly sure enough believe it. I want to tell you, when we first started this, I didn't think we'd make it past a few episodes. A lot of people agreed with me. I'm looking out here in the audience at a few people who are shaking their heads wondering how we did get this far past a few episodes. The first conception of the Shaun of the South podcast came when I was in Mississippi with my coonhound, black and tan bloodhound, Ellie Mae, and she sat on the porch next to the rocking chairs, and I was typing on a portable typewriter. The written word doesn't translate into the spoken word all that easily. In fact, what I write comes out very differently than what I say. But 75 episodes proves that mediocrity ain't all that bad. I got a lot of people I want to thank. I'm just going to start rolling through the list. I like to thank my wife first and foremost for being the proverbial wind beneath my wings. Yes, this woman gets up just about every morning and she has coffee on the stove in a white cornware percolator that we have had since the beginning of our marriage and then even before that. I would like to thank my mother-in-law, Miss Mary, who I started this podcast when I was living in the upstairs bedroom of her house. And we were always in and out. My wife and I were traveling, and I was doing a lot of speaking, and we would come in the middle of the night. Mother Mary would come walking out of that little house, bedroom of hers, holding on to her walker, and that oxygen tank machine was going. She had oxygen tubes underneath her nose, and she would say, "Can I fix you something to eat?" And we'd say, "Well, we're not all that hungry." She said, "Oh, I just made some pear salad." And for those of you who don't know, pear salad is a whole pear from a can of heavy syrup placed onto a plate with a third of a cup of Duke's mayonnaise topped with cheddar cheese and a maraschino cherry on top. And I would rather eat a bowling shoe. I would like to thank my mother, who stood by me from my very childhood. I would like to thank my sister and my brother-in-law for taking the very first pictures of one of the early Shaun of the South podcasts. I'd like to thank Brother Aaron for playing the fiddle so often. And I'd like to thank John Link for playing piano behind us. I'd like to thank my longtime friend Fred Domulo and Tom Latenzer. And I'd like to thank Brother Lyle. Brother Lyle is one of the men who kind of first encouraged me to start writing. Good, solid friends. I would like to thank Jocelyn, my editor. I have a very, very first novel coming out this July, and Miss Jocelyn is a woman from the publishing company who actually had the audacity to believe in me. Lord knows I don't know why. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman. I want to thank Alex. Alex, you know who you are. My life could probably not have been possible the way it is right now if it wasn't for you. Thank you very much. And I would also very much like to thank, well, excuse me, hold on a second here. Well, look at that. It's my mother. Hold on. Hello? Well, hey, Mom, how you doing? Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. I would love some if you got, yes. Just give me a big old slice and wrap it in saran wrap, and I'll come by on my way back home here from Georgia, and I'll probably eat it inside of 10 seconds. Yes, ma'am. Well, no, I'm not too busy right now. I'm just kind of hanging out here with several of my friends. Georgia, ma'am. We're in Georgia right now. Yes, ma'am. It would be hard to name you all my friends. There's a lot of them. How many? I don't know. There was supposed to be more, but a lot of people didn't show up tonight. Well, it's probably because there's a lot more interesting things to do in South Georgia on a Friday night. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Well, no, I hadn't talked to her in the last few days. She is? Well, God bless her. No, I didn't know she quit the Baptist church. Is that right? No, I hadn't heard that about Brother Lawrence. No way. That's a lot of money to embezzle. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will be there, yes, for this Sunday in church. I'll be there. Yes, ma'am. I'll come pick you up at around 9 o'clock. No, I know, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Okay, I'll do that. I know how you like them cheese straws. Some cheese straws from Thomasville. Yes, I'll swing by and pick you up about 10 gallon. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So how's that? No, I had no idea. What will her children do? No. With him? Why, I can't even believe it. No, I know you don't gossip. No, this is vital information. I understand that. Yes, ma'am. You say it's cold? How cold is it? You say your teeth are chattering, even when they're in the glass beside your bed. Oh, Lord, man. I understand. Yes, ma'am. Well, I hope it warms up. Well, Mama, I really need to go. I hate to cut you off, but I got a bunch of people looking at me right here in the eye. Oh, yes, ma'am, I will. I definitely will. I will tell them you said hello. I promise I will. Yes, ma'am. I will pray for my sister. I know it. I know it. God bless her. I will. I will pray for Aunt Eula. Yes, ma'am, I will. Oh, Lord. Is that right? And inside the goiter were teeth and hair? God, that's great, Mama. Well, she'll be at the top of our prayer list, I promise. I'll have everybody here pray. Yes, ma'am. I'll have everybody here pray for Aunt Delpha. Yes, ma'am. I promise. All right. Thank you, ma'am. I love you, Mama. I love you. All right. Goodbye. Let's see here. Where was I? Well, I do believe that could be the first time I've had a phone call here on the stage. I've done a lot of these shows for the past 3 years. My phone always sits in my pocket on vibrate. I've never answered it during a performance until tonight, but it was my mother, and she deserved that much because my mother is the reason that I do anything with my life at all. If it wasn't for her, and it wasn't for her guidance and her unfounded beliefs in me, I probably would not be able to do what I do to any form or fashion or degree, because I would not have any basis of confidence. Everybody needs at least one person to believe in them, and my mother is the beautiful woman who first believed in me. I would like to dedicate this 75th podcast to my mother. And now let's have another tune here from Clark Zupardi and Hartley, everybody. Clark Zupardi and Hartley.
Come sit by me, my darling. Let me sing a song for you. Long days spent together, all the things that we could do. Oh, let me sing you love songs. Let me take you by the hand. Come sit by me, my darling. Won't you let me be your man? Come sit by me, my darling. Let me sing a song for you. A fair-haired baby's yet unborn. All the springs that we'll live through. Winter's face together, the summer shining on our land. Come sit by me, my darling. Won't you let me be your man? Sit by me, my darling. Let me sing a song for you. A song to keep the night at bay. A song to see us through. It's a song we'll sing together. Down the years, hand in hand. Oh, come sit by me, my darling. Won't you let me be your man? Won't you let me be your man? Won't you let me be your man?
Well, I will never forget, it was a winter in Spring Hill, Tennessee, and I was with my father. He was a man who wore denim every day of his life to go to work, and leather boots that laced up real tight, and if it was a cold day, he wore these special kinds of boots that were insulated, and he'd wear these thick gloves. He wore 4 or 5 layers of clothes, one on top of the other, until he looked like a strong man underneath all that padding. But he was not a super strong man. I knew that just about all my life. My father was notoriously skinny. In fact, my mother used to say his jeans had to be altered so that he only had one back pocket. If it wasn't for his Adam's apple, he'd have no shape at all. My daddy had to stand up twice just to make a shadow. He was so skinny he had to run around in the shower just to get wet. I could do this all day if you want. My father was a skinny man with a long, lean, skinny neck. He had a laugh that sounded a lot like Mr. Ed. He was a funny man. He was a joke teller and a storyteller. And before he died, he was a man that was magnetic. People just always gathered around him. In Spring Hill, it was no different. The men who helped build the GM plant with him, they would just kind of gather around my father. He was a man who once told me, and I will never, ever, for my livelong days, forevermore, will I ever forget this. My father said the secret to life is to just keep on going. Keep on going. Now, this sounds so painfully simple it hurts, but if you think about it, it is a little piece of old-fashioned wisdom. I'm a writer myself. And I used to write a little bit on a laptop when I first started. I would write on this laptop, and there's something about a word processor that's very different than typing on a typewriter or writing longhand. While you write on a word processor, you have the opportunity after every letter to stop, to backspace, to respell, to look up a word with the internet, or to highlight everything, copy, paste, delete. You can alter it in any way, shape, or form. But when you're on a typewriter or longhand, you are forced to accept what is and keep going. It is the same with people who play music for a living, and I have known many of these people. I dropped out of school when I was in the 7th grade, and one of my secondary sources of income was playing music in smoky rooms that had a long place where people would gather on stools and order drinks, and people would put in requests. Once you started a song, that was it. You had to keep on playing. A lot of people who learn how to play the guitar, a lot of people who learn how to play the piano, they learn how to read music first, which I never did, I'm sorry to say. I've played in churches most of my life and played in rooms that I probably ought not mention with neon signs on the windows, and I did not read a lick of music. But the people who I have met who have learned how to read music, who are so good at what they do, when they play, if they don't get it right while they're playing, following the music, they stop and they go back and they start over, and they will play it until they get it perfect. But there is no such thing as perfection. But when you play on an old rickety stage with a bunch of people who work hard 9-to-5 jobs for a living looking right back at you, you do not have the luxury of stopping your song. If you begin the song, "Hello, darling, glad to see you. It's been a long time, you're just as lovely as you used to be." Well, if you start that song, you better make sure that you've got something prepared to say after the next line, because you cannot stop. You cannot look it up. Once you start, you got to finish. That's life. That's at least what my father said, and I took this to heart. I've always believed it. The secret to life is just to keep on going. 3 words: keep on going. My father used to drive a white welding truck every day of his life. But when I was born, he drove this Ford F-100 that towed a welding machine on the back, and I can close my eyes and still see that truck. It has oxygen tanks on the back with dangling tubes and hoses, and inside is that vinyl seating, that vinyl bench seat that they took out of trucks a long, long time ago. That vinyl bench seat was in trucks ever since the conception of the truck, but I believe that Planned Parenthood has done away with it. Inside that truck were always two things. On the dashboard there would be a clipboard with a yellow legal pad on it and all the notes my father had made. And there would always be in the seat just between he and I, when I rode in the passenger seat, a welding helmet with that mask that came down over his face and that square-shaped window he could flip up or flip down. A welding helmet. That was my father's truck. That's the truck I grew up in. I can still smell the must and the sweat and the dust and the floorboards, and I can smell that diesel engine, and I can look into his back window and I can see that welding machine being towed behind him and that orange igloo cooler that is fastened to the bumper with a bungee cord. That was my father's truck. Spring Hill, Tennessee was a fun place to be that winter. And my father, he took me to the GM plant that he was building. And I sat there and I looked at this thing that was about the size of a city. And I loved it. I loved it because it represented my father's ascent from blue-collar mediocrity into being one of them. Now, in my father's word, there were two kinds of people. There was us and there was them. If you were us, you were blue-collar. And you knew what it meant to be a blue collar. You knew what it meant to drive a Ford F-100 with a bench seat in the middle. And you knew what it meant to go through traffic after a long day of work, just barely holding on to that steering wheel with a loose grip because you were so tired and covered in dust and sweat on your denim clothes. If you were one of us, you never used words like cul-de-sac. You didn't know things about subdivisions. You didn't go to dinner parties. The only kind of dinner parties you went to on your uncle's back porch where men stood beside a little red cooler on the floor, and they gathered around together and they looked off into the distance and they talked about the possibility of putting in an above ground pool just above the septic tank. That's us. If you were them, you talked a little bit different and you acted a little bit different. And you had a little bit more sophistication in your life. And you would go to these little things called dinner parties where they have place settings, and you would have to start from the outside of your eating utensils, working your way inward. And you ate things like tomato aspic, which looks like reconstituted bowling wax, cut into little butter-shaped slices and spread onto saltine crackers. I would rather lick a mule between the ears than eat tomato aspic. And everybody at these little parties, if you're them, has conversations about what do you do for a living. Well, I myself have been to a few of these parties, and I've had that question aimed at me before. I was about, I would say 3 weeks ago, I went to a party in a really, really nice part of town, in a subdivision, a word that takes me some time to figure out how to say. I don't know why anybody would willingly go into a subdivision, because I was raised as one of quote-unquote us. I don't know why anybody would pay homeowners association dues and abide by covenants and restrictions, especially when they do not allow your Uncle Jeether's RV to be parked in the driveway. That's what they do. This subdivision was the kind of place that had a man at the guard gate. That man at the guard gate has to give you a morally disapproving look before you enter. He looks at you, he gives you a little slip of paper, he tells you where to go, and when you drive your noisy truck past his guard gate, he just stands behind you with his arms crossed, shaking his head, going, because you are, if you're like me, you're one of us. You don't belong in this kind of subdivision with a golf course in the background. The irony here is, I helped build the house where this dinner party was, where I was going. Yes, sir, it's true. When I dropped out of school in the 7th grade, the only jobs available to me, as I said before, were playing music in establishments that my mother would probably rather not hear I played in, and construction work. I got a job with a man who taught me how to do just about everything. He was a contractor, and I did grunt work. I hung drywall, I laid tile, I manned a wet saw. I did just about everything there was to do. I installed recessed light fixtures. I applied mud tape to the joints in the drywall, and I sanded them down until the end of the day I looked like Casper the Friendly Ghost, covering that white dust. I'll never forget when that house got its CO, its certificate of occupancy. Man, I went and I got all the boys breakfast at McDonald's. And I got there, as the youngest man on the job, everybody got their Egg McMuffins and their Sausage McMuffins. And we stood looking at that house and we clapped. We walked through that house and it gave me a sense of accomplishment I had not had because I didn't go to school. Accomplishment runs thin in my family. It runs thin if you're one of us. Sad to say, it runs thin. But when you look at this house, you feel something akin to pride. I walked into this house for this dinner party. I walked inside. There was a woman. She greeted me at the door. She asked if she could take my jacket. She took my jacket. I was wearing a blazer underneath that, a tweed blazer that I also bought at the thrift store. And I looked down, I was wearing penny loafers that probably didn't match from the thrift store. My wife was with me and we were trying very, very hard not to stand out too much. But it's almost impossible because when you go to this man's little place where he's serving wine and all sorts of fancy highball drinks that cost more than my kidneys would draw in on the black market, he looks at you a little funny when he says, "What do you have to drink?" And you look around and you say, "Do you got any Mick Ultra?" He says, "Do what?" My wife looks at me with the kind of look that suggests she will castrate me with a pair of yard clippers if I don't shut my mouth. We went to our main table, and I was distracted during the dinner party. I was looking around at the ceilings. It had exposed wooden beams and recessed light fixtures. The exposed wooden beams were really just pine beams which had been framed in cedar. I had helped build those frames, and I had helped oil the cedar beams so that they had that nice rich color. And I'd helped hang the sheetrock that butted against these beams, and I'd helped put the first light bulbs in these recessed lighting fixtures. And I looked below me. My feet were walking on travertine tile, beautiful travertine tile. I helped lay that tile. I will never forget being taught how to use the wet saw by my Mexican friends on the job site. And when I used that wet saw, I stood there with much supervision around me. They weren't just teaching me how to run a wet saw, they were teaching me a skill. Many of these skills I learned on this house would go with me for the rest of my life. They're still with me. In fact, I owned them before I owned a college education or a high school equivalency education. I owned the skills that allowed me to learn how to read a measuring tape and how to cut miter joints and 45-degree angles and dado joints and how to install things on the ceiling to keep them center, or how to install things on a wall, or how to zip up sheetrock or lift it in a way that doesn't kill your back. I've had one back surgery, L4, L5, and S1, and this is the product of my life that I spent working a job that a lot of people don't always pay attention to. I sat at this table. There was a nice little chef, and he was serving all 14 of us. The man next to me had a gold watch on his hand, and something about the way he talked made me realize that this gold watch was not an imitation knockoff Rolex. It was the real deal. That thing was huge. It was about the size of a tractor tire. And when this man was talking, everybody asked what people did for a living. Oh, Lord, you want to know how to make a man feel low if you're like me? Let's start talking about what we do. For a long time, I used to answer this question when someone would say, "What do you do?" I would say, "About what?" But now, I realize that a lot of people view me as a writer. In fact, that's probably the only daggum reason I got invited to a party like this. The man next to me was talking about what he did. He said, "I trade for a living." I looked at my wife and I raised my eyebrows because I had this strange feeling this man was not talking about trading Topps baseball cards. Oh boy, the woman next to him, she said that she just got a job at her father's firm. She didn't say what she did at her father's firm, nor what her father's firm was all about. But I get the feeling that this firm was as firm as a cinder block. Yeah, and then a man was talking about doing commodities, and another man was talking about doing governmental law, and I just kind of held this blank look on my face. I don't know what people see me as. I'm not sure what I see myself as. And then the chef announced what he was going to be making for an appetizer. He made tomato aspic. He set it down in front of us, and this stuff just kind of wobbled on the plate, and I held my mouth. Tomato aspic, it makes me want to lose my lunch. My wife kind of squeezed my leg and said, "Don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass me." And then the chef, he walked around. He couldn't get 14 people to shut up long enough, so he took this little bell out of his pocket and he rang it, ding, 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 and he recited to us what the menu was going to be. He used culinary words that were just over my head by at least 10 miles. The only thing I did recognize what he was talking about was quail. He said, "I'm serving quail that has been placed in a soy glaze and pan sauteed." And this marks the very first time in my entire life that I've ever had quail that was not gummed up by my Uncle Dietrich's Labrador, Brewster. I excused myself while they was eating, and I went to the bathroom. I walked to the bathroom and I kind of sat down on the toilet. I didn't need to go. I just ran the fan so that no one could hear me. And I looked around at this bathroom. I looked at the grout lines on the floor around the toilet. They were perfect. I laid that towel. I laid it with my own two hands. I took the measurements. I walked it up them steps. I placed it around that hole in the floor where the toilet would eventually go. Them grout lines, I filled them in, and then I sealed them. That was my floor. And I looked at it and I felt good about it. And I walked out of that bathroom and I rejoined the table, and the conversation was still focusing on what people did for a living. There was one woman who was talking about what kind of manufacturing she was in, and there was another man talking about trading stocks on the stock market. Another man was talking about what he did with his business of financial advisement. And I felt so out of place when I looked at my place setting, because not only do I not know which direction to start eating stuff off my plate and which utensil to use and how to hold my pinky outward, I didn't know whether or not I belonged at a place like this. And I could feel it coming. I could feel it coming. The man next to me looked at me and said, "So what do you do?" My God, what do I do? I don't know. I've wanted to know. I really have. I've wanted to know who I was and what I was. I'm afraid that when I die on my tombstone, they're going to say, "Sean Dietrich tried to find himself but died trying." When what I really want on my tombstone is one of two things. I want it to say, "Sean Dietrich, that man was a mess," or "Sean Dietrich, that man was a character." I love messes and I love characters. Don't care a thing about what you do for a living or what anybody else does for a living. I love people. People who try when it would be so much easier to quit. People who keep pushing on. Like my mother, who delivered papers at 2:30 in the dadgum morning. When times were tough, my mother and I, in that Nissan, driving in figure-8 patterns through a godless neighborhood, throwing newspapers. My mother'd say, "Put some shoulder into it like one of your favorite pictures." And I'd kind of throw it kind of wimpy-like, and that thing just flopped through the air and hit the driveway. She'd say, "No, it's got to make it to the welcome mat. Put some shoulder into it." And so the next house, I reared back and I threw that thing harder than Greg Maddox or Bob Feller. And that thing boomeranged through the air and hit a plate glass window, and it shattered into 1,000 pieces. And my mother's mouth dropped open, and she did what any God-fearing deep water Baptist woman would do. She just kept on driving. I admire people who try. I admire people who wear denim. I admire people who do what they don't want to do because there's people depending on them to do it. I admire men like my father. I went to Spring Hill last week. And I walked to the GM plant. It was a Sunday. Nobody was there. The parking lot was completely empty. And my wife dropped me off at the very edge of the parking lot and let me walk all by myself, and she stayed at the end in the car while I was idling. And I walked through the parking lot, and my cell phone was in my back pocket. I wasn't there to take pictures or nothing. I was there to think. And I walked the lines of that parking lot until I got to the very end. And I saw one vehicle in the corner. It was a white vehicle with oxygen tanks on the back and dangling hoses. Well, something got the best of me. I walked up to it and I pressed my face against the window, and I saw a bench seat, gray vinyl. And on the dashboard I saw a metal clipboard with a yellow legal pad on it. And in the seat I saw a welding mask. The man at that dinner party asked me, "What do you do?" "I hear you're a writer." That's what he said. "I understand you're a writer." I looked at him, and then I looked down at my place setting with that godless tomato aspic sitting there. And then I looked at the tile beneath my feet. And I looked at the sheetrock above my head. And I looked at my wife sitting next to me. And I looked around at the people at that table who were all looking at me like I'd really done something with my life being a writer. I hadn't done nothing. And I just said to him, "No, sir, I'm not just a writer. I'm a lot more than that. I'm just an average, common guy who feels so lucky, and I feel like a dead pig in the sunshine." He just kind of looked at me with this confused grin. He said, "Oh, okay, well, I thought you was a writer." And the conversation moved on, and we all just kind of talked about other things. And the host of the party, when the main dish was coming out, she just looked around at her table and she was glowing. She was so proud of this dinner party. And I smiled at her and I said, "Ma'am, I want you to know from the deep down bottom of my heart, you have one beautiful house. A beautiful, beautiful house." She said, "Why, thank you. Why, thank you. It is a beautiful house, ain't it?" I look at it and I feel something that is inside me that makes me glad to be who I am. Something that feels privileged to have been born to the class of people I have been. A class of people who once told me a long time ago that the secret to life was just to keep going. 75 episodes of this podcast. Am I proud of it? You bet your tomato aspic that I am. 75 episodes. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. It's been a wonderful pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for listening to Sean of the South. I've been your host today, Sean Dietrich, and it has been a bona fide pleasure for these past 75 episodes. This episode was brought to you by Case Knives, a tradition of my family dating back to my granddaddy, who once said the best way to cure idle hands was to build something. So keep your hands sharp with a case knife. And by Folklore Brewing Company, quite literally the best brew in Alabama. Folklore Brewing and Meadery.com. 75 episodes. I want to say thank you to you who have listened to this episode and made this show possible. We did not think we would make it past a few episodes. We had many people tell us it was a foolish idea to start a podcast, but we did it anyway with $52 worth of equipment, and here we are. We've gathered many friends and many listeners, and I just can't say thank you enough. We're going to be taking a short hiatus for the month of April so that my production supervisor and my audio engineer can take a vacation with their families. We want them to love and enjoy their own lives. They spend most of their waking moments on this stinking show. I also want to say thank you to the people who've gone and been in our audiences over this past 75 episodes and laughed courteously at the jokes that weren't even very funny. I want to say thank you to the event planners who've made these things possible, these events that we record the podcasts at, and I want to say thank you to you who have sat and listened to us in your car or on your cell phone or with your kids or with your grandkids. You have no idea that you have changed my entire life. I never thought I had a talent for this sort of thing, and I'm still not quite sure that I do. But I have enjoyed myself. Thanks to the bands, the 75 different musical acts who have contributed to our show, and thank you to everybody who has tuned in religiously to hear their letters read over the show or send in emails and messages to us. I better wrap this up because I'm going a lot longer than I thought it would. That wonderful music you heard behind me today was Nick Zupardi, Adam Clark, and Joe Hartley joining forces as Clark, Zupardi, and Hartley, blending original compositions infused with a passion for foot stomping, bluegrass, and old-time music. Do yourself a favor and visit Clark Zupardi, Zuppardi, Hartley.co.uk. That's right, these guys are British as they come. To find anything more about what I do, you can visit SeanOfTheSouthShow.com, and there you can find archived episodes dating back to the very first one all the way to this 75th episode you just heard. And while you're there, don't forget to take the time to drop us a line and tell us about your birthday announcements, potluck invitations, ice cream socials, and I will do my best when a month of April is over to read them over the air, because I love to do that sort of stuff for my friends. And speaking of friends, I love you, and you have changed my life, upside down, inside out, backwards, forwards, and right up front. Thank you. Adios.